Why don't you read Genesis 4:1 just so...
Okay, from the King James it says, "And Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived, comma, and bare Cain." And then we've got another break, "and said, comma, I have gotten a man from the Lord." And then chapter 2 it says, "And she again bare his brother." It doesn't say she reconceived.
Right.
Or whatever. All of a sudden we've got two people showing up, bam, bam. So, if we go back and we look when Eve was having the relationship with the serpent, it says she ate with the serpent, then she turned around and gave to her husband.
Right.
So it's almost within minutes.
Right.
And, the medical record specifically says that if a woman has relationships with two men within hours of each other, that she can actually give birth to a type of twin where one twin is of one father and the other twin is of the other father of the two men. So it's not something that humanly is impossible. And I think that what we're looking at is exactly what happened.
In finality with these particular targums, and then we're going to move into the as in the days of Noah. This is Genesis chapter 5, and this particular passage is completely left out of the King James Version of the Bible. And it's very, very interesting in what it says, because it specifically talks about what Dr. Joye and I have been stating in the previous few minutes here. Chapter 5. "This is the book of the genealogy of man. In the day that the Lord created man, in the likeness of the Lord he made him. Male and female he created them, and blessed them in the name of his word. And he called their name man in the day they were created. And Adam lived 130 years and begat Sheth, who had the likeness of his image and of his similitude. For before had Hava borne Cain, who was not like to him. And Abel was killed by his hand. And Cain was cast out, neither is his seed genealized in the book of the genealogy of Adam. But afterwards there was born one like him, and he called his name Sheth. And the days of Adam after he begat Sheth were 800 years, and he begat sons and daughters." So again, just reading this one line. "And Cain was cast out, and neither is his seed genealized in the book of the genealogy of Adam."
That's right. It's not included in it. And you would think, according to Hebrew teachings and things, the firstborn, the first fruits, would have had accessibility to have had all the genealogy set up and recorded as being the firstborn.
Right.
The firstborn, or the first of whatever, fruits or whatever, was the most important aspect. So you find it very interesting that here we have the first son
exactly.
is all of a sudden, he's not even included in Adam's genealogy.
Right.
That is a red flag, and that's something we have got, people really need to pay attention to, that there is a reason he was not included. Even when we look at Jacob and Esau, and the fact that they were like a twin, one came after the other.
Right.
Of course, it was prophesied before, Jacob and Esau were born, that he was going, the older was going to serve the younger. But I think it's almost a play on what's happened. It's almost a turnaround from what happened in Cain and Abel's situation. Yes. And then at the same time, when you think about the birth of Jesus being with Mary, and the fact that she became pregnant prior to being married to someone, it was almost like it's trying to refix what happened in the very beginning with Adam and Eve.
Right.
It's almost like a double play on that. So it seems to me that when you look at this and you see that the lineage of Cain is left out, and we understand that he is considered the son of Satan, no doubt, because he was the first murderer, and then the fact that we've got other references biblically of like Esau and Jacob to look at this and see how it's almost turned around, like God was trying to turn it around and get it back right where it needed to be. And I think that, if you don't want to believe these others, just look at what the Bible says.
Right,
and you can
exactly.
kind of coordinate that. And that's why it's real important to have a Bible that has a concordance and look at where these different words come from and cross-reference them, because many times it's very eye-opening.
Absolutely. And I'd like to comment also on why it is that the Bible categorizes and details lineage from particular patriarch to other particular patriarch, even the matriarch, and covers the lines in such detail. And the reason they're doing that is because of this separate bloodlines and the war between the bloodlines. And we know that going back to Genesis 3:15, the in between the bloodlines, that Christ would come later through the line of Sheth, through the line of Adam, and that once he was born into the flesh, and that he fulfilled his role here as God in flesh, that he would bring salvation into the world, and he would offer it even to those Gentile nations that were excluded previous to his coming. And that is also important too, because I know Paul had questions on whether those that are of the Canaanite lineage could have part in salvation. And we'll talk about that shortly, but we're going to cover some other stuff with this particular video, and then we're going to go into questions that Paul has for both Dr. Joye and I about that particular thing.
But I agree with you that if Cain's lineage was as it should be, it would have been put in the Bible. He was the first son. He was the first. In fact, according to tradition, Hebrew tradition, it would be to give the first son to the Lord. And we have seen where that has happened throughout, biblical history. Samuel is a perfect example that he was given to God, to do what he needed to do. He was the firstborn. And so if Adam and Eve were following God, and they were, according to what was established in Genesis, they had their understanding of God and who he was and the greatness that he was, they would have presented Cain as their first fruit.
Absolutely.
But and the fact that Abel went and did his first fruits to the Lord, and that Cain chose not to do a first fruit, and then his lineage is not mentioned, tells you that something was wrong with him from the get-go. Mm-hmm. That you can't ignore it.
One other thing about these particular Targums, and I don't have the exact quotes of this, but one of the interesting things in the Targums is they give a detailed accounting of why it was that Cain killed Abel. And the reason being is, according to the Targums, is that once his offerings weren't accepted, and it says that he didn't give the best of what he had, that he tried to shortchange the Lord, that he denied that there would be a judgment. Him and his brother, he took Abel with him out into the field, and they were discussing the afterlife. And Cain kept denying that there would be an afterlife and that this world was conducted in good works. And Abel
that's so much today in secret society.
Absolutely. It is the same exact thing. Same thing. And Abel kept telling him, no, that there is a judgment, there is eternal reward, and that there will be salvation for the righteous. And Cain said no, and he, in order for him to keep denying, he then got mad at his brother and killed him there in the field, and that's when, and that story is left out. But I found that kind of interesting as well.
Well, the fact that if Cain was of Satan, and if he was acquired and he did not have the breath or the soul of life, then if he was of some other nature other than the humanists that we are with a soul, then if he was in a fallen state, he didn't have what you would typically call eternal life. And I think that's the thing that a lot of people forget, is that these fallen angels, when they came upon the daughters of man, which you're going to go into in a few minutes, they were in a fallen state. And a spiritual being in a fallen state is fallen forever. So when you think about eternal life in paradise, it's not available for them. So if he was, saying to his brother, oh, well, why are you doing that? There's no such thing, you're not going to get to heaven. There's no heaven. That's exactly the same thing that Satan is telling humanity, to take your chances of getting into heaven, because he knows his chance is gone. Right. It's over with. It's already done. So it's so important that even if you get yourself caught up in the secret society, that you understand that doing good works is not the answer to getting into heaven. The Bible specifically tells you that if you are of God, you will do godly things. Exactly. But your good works are not the thing that helps you get anywhere or get ahead or whatever with God. Right. That it is a choice with your soul and who you are to accept good versus evil. Exactly. And I think, we can look at this, and if that is a part of some other work, it specifically, again, is really telling us that the Bible is true. Because Cain did kill Abel, and he had such hatred that he didn't want Abel to get something better than what he could have. And if he was in a fallen state, Abel had the chance. And we know that once Abel was killed, what did God say to Cain? Your brother's blood cries to me from the ground. Right. His blood was still alive. Right. That though he had tried to get rid of him, he still lived. Right. Life is in the blood. That's right. Exactly. And we will be moving into as in the days of Noah, because I think it's important that we cover that aspect of it, and then also talk about why the Lord sent them into the promised land to wipe out this particular bloodline, this Canaanite lineage, and why he said to take no man, woman, or child, to spare no man, woman, or child. Because for those that don't understand it this way, they look at the God of the Old Testament and say, well, how can he say to kill, children? But they don't understand that this is a wicked, abominable seed, that they drink the blood of humanity. They are also cannibals. They eat the flesh and they're worshiping the fallen angels. And we know the kind of abominable things that the fallen angels have made their worshipers do throughout history with, the blood sacrifices and killing of victims. Well, see, that's the thing that I would have a lot of people question me about. How could a loving God tell people to just, tell his people to go out and just slaughter these people? But when you understand that lineage was a bad lineage, and even Moses was told, do not even have any relationship with these people, do not mingle with, if God made everybody as an equal or whatever, he would not have had that, because his whole intent when he came upon the cross of Calvary was to save all that would turn to him. So if that be the case, there had to be, this is a red flag again. What was so strange about these people he wanted completely wiped off the earth? And we can look at the giants, that, there was King David. They were told to get rid of those kinds of giants and to watch them and stay away from the people who were involved with them. And it all ties back that lineage of Cain and the giants were all from the fallen angels. Exactly. So when God said, get rid of them, he wanted you to get rid of them. Just like today, he wants you to get rid of Satan and keep him out of your life. Right. Same way. So whatever it takes to keep him away is to keep him away. And he warned Moses about the leaven. Should they spare any of these tribes? And they actually did. They got tired of war. They spared some of them and assimilated some of them, and they ended up losing their land and their birthright. That's right. It's like the biggest thing that I have found is that the commandments tell us, that you're to have one God and only one God. And if you start mixing and saying, well, I can hear a little bit of this and I can accept a little bit of that, then at that point, that mixing is considered adultery and whoredom. And these words are infiltrated throughout our Bible. Is that you don't mix, you don't have abominations with other pagan religions. That is considered adultery. And if it was sexual, I think it starts right there with the fact that Eve had a sexual relationship relationship with the serpent. That the man and the woman are supposed to be together. You're supposed to be having children with this one and children with that one. We are the only species that God created that is married, and people don't stop. Why was it so important that we are married? Where the birds and the bees and the other thing, they do whatever they want to. They don't have to worry, about having one wife and their children and looking after them. We're the species that's doing that. So that's telling you that there is something very significant about us and our seed, and how it has to be done. It has to be done correct according to commandment. Like I say, when you start seeing mixing, then you start seeing falling. For example, when Moses and them started infiltrating and mixing, they fell. When Solomon, and we talk about King Solomon, the richest man, the smartest man in the world, the moment that he started mixing with the strange women, and then he started bringing in their gods, what happened to his kingdom? I mean, it really fell apart. And this is King David's son. Right. So you can see that God will forgive. King David did wrong. He committed adultery. His first son, he lost his first son because of that with Bathsheba. And if you understand that David asked for forgiveness, God is willing to do forgiveness for wrongness. But if he'd have kept doing it like King Solomon came along and said, well, I decide I'll do what I want to do, then it's over with. He's not going to continue to put up with it. And I think those stories, which are very true stories, are in the Bible to show us that from the very get-go, when the mixing occurred, it was bad. And throughout history, if it continues, it's bad. And you get right on into Revelation, and what does it say? There's the whoredom of Babylon. That is the mixing and the infiltration of evil against good in the end days. And we're seeing that happen now.
And the Lord told us that we cannot serve two masters.
You can't.
Right. Because that leaven, once it assimilates in, it takes over.
Yes, it does.
And that's what caused them to lose their birthright. Now, I have a chapter in my book. This is my latest one.
Hold that one up for you.
Lucifer, father of Cain. But I have a chapter in here that is called Enmity Between the Seed Lines. And it talks about how the Lord warned the patriarchs all the way up until the time of Noah to not intermarry their tribes with the Canaanite tribes. And if you read a particular book, the first book of Adam and Eve and the second book of Adam and Eve, those particular first instances of their life here on the planet up until the time of Noah, when the Lord decided to bring the deluge on because it had just gotten so out of control, where we are now with all the the abductions and the mixing and the it's kind of repeating itself. The Lord told us not to intermarry, and it shows that in the second book of Adam and Eve. Throughout each one of the patriarchs, how the Lord implored them, warned them to not go down and marry with the daughters of Cain, or to intermarry with the Canaanite tribes. And so what Dr. Joye was talking about is so very important, so very relevant, because of that is what caused them to fall.
Well, I think the other interesting thing too, and I think that we've mentioned this before, is the fact that if these beings came upon the daughters of man and they had children, they were called giants. Right there, how do you get a giant? If Adam and Eve were originally, Eve came out of Adam, then their DNA would have been a certain DNA that could have never been, that they could have had a child like Mendel's bees or whatever. Right. You would continue to have the same bloodline, and the same trait. Then all of a sudden we've got these other things getting involved, and now we've got a being that we know the Bible tells us is huge. Mm-hmm. Even after the flood, they had 6 fingers and 6 toes. Right. You can look at King Og was one of them, and you can look at Goliath that David slaughtered. Right. So the fact that you have anything DNA changed means that something got into the bloodline DNA-wise to change a type of traditional human into a type of giant.
Exactly.
And I think that is why it's so important to understand like you said, that we are starting to see some strange things happen, especially in the UFO alien abduction scenario, where people are saying that they, first of all, had little tiny children that looked very weak and whatever, and now they're starting to say, well, we're starting to see this being used as a cloning process to build a bigger and stranger looking human being that's more, let's say, superhuman in a way.
Super soldier.
So we're going from the days of Noah, where we got the giants who were supposed the demigods, and they ruled from Mount Olympus, and they had all these great things that they could do, that now we're moving to are the fallen angels so engrossed with this alien abduction stuff that they are getting the DNA from wherever they can and piecing it back together to rebuild their God-like status.
Right.
And when you start talking about being able to pick your child, and you want them blue-eyed, blonde hair, you want them to run fast, and you want them to have eyes like a hawk, and they're taking and they're manipulating all that genetic structure, you can say somebody's back playing with humanity. And who did that in the beginning? The Bible tells us.
Right, Genesis chapter 6.
Tells us. And we're, like I said earlier, we are the first generation that is seeing the days of Noah, and never in history has this happened to this point that we are right now. But we are seeing it being fulfilled.